Rich, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Okay. I'm currently, well, people say I'm a physicist, but I'm more of a simulation engineer, which is kind of like being a physicist, but you have to optimize your math to be able to run in some reasonable way with hardware limitations. So a lot of writing code and optimizing code for math, and it's usually applied to like industry, manufacturing, aerospace, that kind of stuff. So primarily building physics engines for simulating cloth and soft body and that kind of stuff. The reason I'm interested in this topic, I have a long history of interaction with and involvement in, well, ministry or theology related things. I have my own YouTube channel that discusses theology. It's the Theological dark web. And the primary question that I find myself interacting with, or the issue, I guess, it's all related to epistemology, but it has to do with pointing out the difference between what modern forms of Christianity think the Bible says or think the Bible means, and what the Bible actually says and what it actually means. So my approach to interpreting Scripture is something like, the Bible says what it says, it does not say what it does not say. It means what the original author intended it to mean. It does not mean what it does not mean. And it's really difficult to know the difference when there's so much noise that sort of travels around in Christian thought.
Cool. I'm an atheist, by which I mean that I believe that everything in the world is explained by natural causes that are unguided from a mind of any kind. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe there are for belief in Christianity?
I don't think that you should believe in Christianity, honestly. I think that
All right, debate over.
You're doing,
we're good.
I didn't really think this would be a debate. The more I listen to your channel, the more it's like, oh, he's a kindred spirit. I think there's something that happens in the minds of certain people when you grow up around Christianity, where someone who is an authority figure that's respected by that group identity, like a pastor or a Bible college professor or something like that, will say something that sounds unreasonable. And at that moment of epiphany, there's a couple of different ways that people react. One of them is to defer to the expert opinion, and at that point you shut off your brain. Another one is to put the question on hold, and I guess you could have something like a reaction to it and get all crazy and irrational. But I think from a very early age, I was of the mind to see things that seemed obvious to me, but not obvious to the people who were in authority, and wonder if I'm seeing things wrong or if they're seeing things wrong, or, am I really smarter than the person who has that's the question you ask. Could I be smarter than that person? Is that arrogance? And so, there's all kinds of things that are working against your tendency to question what you're hearing.
A missing like concrete premise of some kind. Like, what do you believe Christianity is? Do you believe it's true? Do you believe it's different than naturalism?
Obviously, Christianity is different than naturalism. When you emailed me, the question in the first email from your guy was, discussing the question, is Christianity true? And, well, first of all, I'd say no. Christianity.
You are breaking up.
Is it internet connection? Is it my audio is breaking up?
Your audio and video was breaking up there for a minute. Seems better now.
Okay. It might be a little bit spotty. That's just because I'm up in the mountains and it's snowing.
So we're off at, is Christianity true?
Okay. Is Christianity true? I understand what you mean by the question, and it would be something like, are the claims put forward by some version of Christianity that I don't know, I don't know exactly which version of Christianity you're referring to, but are the claims that it makes true? And I would say
That's a
no.
good place to start. So, like, do you believe in a non-physical mind that created the universe?
Not necessarily.
Oh, you're breaking up again. It's coming back. It's coming back slowly. Give it another minute. No, no, I'm still breaking up.
Let me try some my internet connection. Am I still here?
Yep, but still slightly breaking up. Well, no, still breaking up though. Now you're gone. Hey, chat, how's it going? Jackie Gleason is king. I don't know who that is, Jackie Gleason. Rat King is king. Elvis is king. Potatoes are true and have eyes. I haven't played recently. I think the last time I played was on stream played guitar, or maybe a little like a day after that. But I haven't been playing much because I've been focusing on trying to grow my business more than play guitar.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I switched networks. Hopefully it will be better. Let me know if it breaks up again, and I'll see if I can do something.
You could try turning off the camera so it's just sending the audio data. That usually makes it better.
Okay, I can also switch my camera resolution down. Will probably help. It's probably just the network, so let's give it a shot for now. Is it breaking up still?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Well, maybe.
But now it's breaking up. Irony. Hey TJump, what's your favorite video game? I am not playing any video games at the moment. I am waiting for my PlayStation 5, waiting for an invitation from Amazon to buy a PlayStation 5 because they're still not in stock anywhere. PS5, PS5, Oh, I think you're back now. I think. Oh no, now it's right again.
I can hear you.
I can hear you. I'm watching your little like network connection dial thingy, and it keeps jumping from like 168, 168.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll attempt to talk. Hopefully, you'll hear some of it. The question, is Christianity true? Well, I know what you mean by the question, but it sounds strange to me. It's kind of like asking, is riding a bicycle true? Because as I have come to understand Christianity, it means to orient one's life towards the teaching or the model or the example of Jesus. Christian means little Christ. So it's someone who's decided to be like Jesus. And it's not really a question that makes sense to ask, is it true? It's more like, is it practical, would be a good question. Whether or not you believe in God seems, I mean, it can be related to the question, like how seriously you would take it if there is a God sort of enforcing this. But it's not necessarily salient to the question, is Christianity practical? Are you with me?
Sure, but I don't. Like, who cares if it's practical? Like lots of things are practical.
Well, if it's practical, then I should make some decisions related to it. It's like, can I ask you what difference does it make if a person believes in God? Like, so a person believes in God, a person doesn't believe in God. What difference does it make?
It
Why
depends on
bother?
the person.
Okay. Well, for example, you obviously you're getting donations. You're able to be a professional YouTuber. You're primarily discussing questions about whether or not God exists. Why is this a relevant enough question that people are supporting your channel? Like, why are people asking this question?
Because it impacts them and the world around them. But what does that matter? Oh, you're breaking up again.
Try it again.
Try shutting the camera off so it's sending less information.
Hello?
Hey, try turning the camera off, because I think the amount of information is going to be one of the problems.
Okay. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to do that.
There should be a little camera. There you go.
Okay. There we go. All right. Any better now? Can you hear me?
We'll try and see how it works. So I was asking, why does the pragmatic applications of the ideology matter? There's lots of pragmatic ideologies that don't have any correspondence to truth. Like, it's pragmatic to be a Dungeons and Dragons player if you get a community out of it, but that doesn't, like, so what?
Well, why would the propositional question, does God exist, matter? Why explore that question unless there's some pragmatic application?
Because we care about truth more than pragmatic application.
All right. So when I said initially that I think you and I are kindred spirits, I feel the same way. I care about truth, but it's kind of silly to say we care about truth whether or not it's relevant, because how many items are there in the cupboard of my neighbor next door? A question like, is there a God? What does this God teach? Does this God have implications? Like, if I step out of line, is this God going to punish me? Answering the question whether or not this God exists becomes relevant at that point. So it's really like, why are we exploring these questions unless there is something we can do with the information? And
well, there's lots of questions we explore even if we can't do anything with the information, like the fact that Alpha Centauri is, I don't know, 4 billion light years away. Like, there's nothing we can do with that information, but it's true. And so I don't, like, it only matters what the ideology says if it's true. If it's not true, then it's like asking how many hairs are on Darth Vader's left butt cheek. It doesn't matter. He doesn't exist. That is the correct answer. And so in the context of religious beliefs, it doesn't matter what any of them say until you first show it's real. If the God is real, then it matters what it says. And if it's not real, then it literally doesn't matter what it says.
yeah, there's an underlying assumption here that the question of God's existence is important for some reason, and maybe a
Well,
question that
the
I've
reason believers act on it is because they believe it's real. So if it's not real, that's
they
kind of
would
like
stop
the whole
acting on
point.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I agree with you. That is the point. I think is it good? Does it make society better? And as to that question, people who believe the claims of, am I cutting out again?
You were a little bit, but I got the
People,
gist of what you were saying. It's like you're talking about, doesn't have a pragmatic beneficial effect on society, which to some degree, yes, but so what?
I think that's the entire relevance. Like, for example, what you're doing, it's like, why are you exploring this question? And if I had to, like, if somebody said, is TomJump doing something that's helping people? I would say yes. He's helping people who are afraid to ask questions, who are afraid of authority, afraid to call stupid arguments stupid, to be emboldened to say, well, maybe my pastor is an idiot. Maybe this ontological argument is ridiculous or stupid. And even though people who are respected in Christian circles,
I'm breaking up again now. Clip what? What am I supposed to clip? All right, you're back.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about the internet.
It's all right. But can you make a proposition for me? Christianity is beneficial, therefore.
Oh, Christianity is beneficial, therefore. Are you just wanting me to make a propositional statement so we can get an argument going?
It's to understand the point of what you're trying to make. So a proposition is just explaining the point. Like the reason you're bringing up the fact that Christianity is beneficial is this. So Christianity is beneficial, therefore.
Well, first of all, can I ask you, what do you mean when you say Christianity? Like, when you hear me say the word Christianity, what are you assuming that I'm talking about?
The religion.
The religion. You mean like Catholicism as a practice? You mean the claims of Protestant Christianity? Do you mean like the view of God's character that comes from the Greek Orthodox position? Do you mean like an Anabaptist commitment to community? I mean, there's so many things that could mean.
Well, yeah, it means all of those, any and all of those.
Then I would say some of those things tend towards happier, healthier people and emotional health and better society, and some of those things are opposite.
Well, that part doesn't matter. So whatever you mean by Christianity, the ones that do lead to that, it has a positive impact, therefore what?
Well, if I define Christianity as orienting your life towards the basic principles that Jesus lived by and taught, we can sum it all up with love your neighbor. I think you could defend using something like moral objectivism, a secular approach to morality, the idea of love your neighbor. Based on the voice.
Yeah, so if you...
I was going to say it might be advantageous to orient yourself towards the that Jesus lived out, understanding that means love your neighbor. So if we're defining Christianity as follow the example of Christ, loving your neighbor tends to make for a happier, healthier you and everyone around you. So I think that Christianity defined as following the example of Jesus is practical. It's a good idea. I'm also not saying that following Jesus is the only way you could learn that loving your neighbor is a good thing. I think he exemplified something that exists.
Breaking up again.
Yep.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Did you catch what I said?
Yep. So the fact that orienting your life in a way that is congruent with the fact that you should love your neighbor can be beneficial. And Christianity, that's one of the principles of Christianity. You think it's the main one or whatever. Therefore, some people may get some benefit out of doing that. Now, there are obviously other ideologies. As you mentioned, it's not the only one. I'd say many of them are better than Christianity, like the ones adopted in most secular nations. And so for them, it would be detrimental to adopt this ideology because it's less good at making you love your neighbor than the new ideologies, right? Breaking up. Still breaking up.
Are you back yet?
Yep,
Sorry,
I can hear you. Yep, I can hear you.
I don't necessarily disagree with you that secular ideologies are better at producing love your neighbor in some cases than Christian ideology. It's a question with a lot of nuance. So it would take some drilling down to identify which version of Christianity tends toward producing Christ-likeness, if you will, and which parts of secular ideology tend towards producing, if we define Christ-likeness as love your neighborness, something like that.
I don't think that matters because you said you're a math guy, right? So if there is, if we adopt an ideology in a given culture and the percentage of the culture adopts each particular version of the ideology, we can average out all of the different versions and how they're adopted by the society to get a median of when an ideology is accepted, what is the predominant version that is accepted that leads to more of that society accepting the love thy neighbor person. And so we can average out of a secular society and of a Christian society the amount who adopt the preferred interpretation will be higher in the secular society. Therefore, secular ideology are better. So even if you think that there's some trueness of Christianity that is all about loving your neighbor, if you introduce that into a society and the vast majority of people don't adopt that, then the impact of Christianity is less positive than the impact of the secular ones, which cause people to actually accept the love your neighbor principle. And so for me, because Christianity as an ideology, whatever it happens to be, if we're measuring the consequences, we can just measure how many people in a society will become better people by adopting it, independent of what the trueness of it is. I'm breaking up again.
Turn off some features to see if that makes a difference. Can you hear me now?
Yep. Did you get my argument there?
Yeah, I can hear everything that you're saying. I'm not sure why I'm breaking up. I turned off the advanced features in the audio. Maybe that will help. Don't know. So you're saying that if you put together some kind of a statistical model and you compare the positive effects of a secular ideology, the positive effects of a Christian ideology, and the secular model is better at producing love your neighbor than the Christian model, then we should reject the Christian model and adopt the secular model. Well, I can't disagree with your approach. I mean, it's mathematically sound, and that might be why I'm intrigued by your channel. I think that is. I think that's. I agree. So, Christianity are and why they cause the kind of effects that they do in people, and I tend to get myself labeled as a heretic by Christians and kicked out of a lot of Christian churches and this kind of thing, because some of the different flavors of Christianity, I think, are horrific and damning. Like, for example, if you accepted a strict Calvinist version of deity, then you end up with a God who is essentially a narcissistic sociopath. And for people who come up to emulate that God, even people who tend to be narcissistic sociopaths, Matt Slick, he
Breaking up after Matt Slick. eFont has 80 YouTube Chrome tabs running in the background.
I wonder if I should hotspot.
Could try that. You can, I think, use your phone and just connect from your phone.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. So I'm going to try to connect to my mobile hotspot.
Cool.
See if I can get it to pop up.
Dogecoin mining. Yes, the most epically useless thing to do with your electricity. I think even like Bitcoin is not worth it anymore. Bitcoin price. Bitcoin's at 20,000. It's at 20,000 exactly. Woof. And back. Boo.
Yeah, you can hear me for now, but I can't find the Wi-Fi for my mobile hotspot, which usually connects automatically. So I'm trying to figure out.
Well, you could just like on your phone go to this link. Go to the link I sent you, and you should be able to come up, join the thing on your phone.
That's a good idea. Let me give that a try.
TJump, do you know any good non-religious prayers? Let's see. I think the Jedi one isn't too bad.
Can you hear me through the phone?
Yes, you can close your computer.
Yeah, that was fun.
All right.
Okay, so maybe this will work a little bit better now.
Sure. We can see your forehead very clearly.
Oh, yes. Probably don't need the video because we all know what I look like, and probably people are trying to get that out of their head.
You hear lots of hand-touching microphone noises.
Okay. No more hand-touching microphone noises. Really sorry about the ends. Am I coming in clear now? No. None of that.
Still
Hello?
spotty, but I don't. It's a different kind of spotty.
Yeah. Turning the microphone in the direction. Oh, you know what? I have an idea. One last thing to try to.
That was sort of working. That was sort of working right there. That was good.
Okay, we'll leave it right here then.
All right, try that. Go over text.
Sorry. All right, can you hear me currently?
Yes.
All right, this is the best audio I have through the phone. All right, I was making a point that if you believe in the God of Calvinism and you worship that God or try to emulate that God, then there's a real risk that you'll become sort of a narcissistic sociopath, because strict Calvinism, while they would deny that it defines God in this way, strict Calvinism actually defines God as sort of a narcissistic sociopath. An honest Calvinist, like Matt Slick, for example, will admit that this is how they view God. They wouldn't use those words because those words are pejorative, but they would use the same definition of those words. So, for example, I asked Matt Slick, when you say that God does all things for his glory, do you mean that you picture God like crowd surfing at a rock concert, soaking up all of the attention and praise of his adoring fans? And he said, yes, absolutely. That's how I view God. And that was in a conversation where he was arguing that God doesn't actually love people or others. God loves, or at least seeks to promote himself above all other things that he seeks. So, which is how you can account for a God who would torment people in hell for all of eternity for his pleasure and for his glory, and pleasure people in heaven for all of eternity for his pleasure and his glory. How the other party is affected is irrelevant to him. God only seeks his glory. And that is, at least by some definition, selfish, if not sociopathic. And I have met Calvinists who are that way. They tend to obey God through fear, because they're, it's like either I cooperate with God or he's going to torment me, or they just justify all of their actions because they believe he causes all things, so that we live in a universe that is purely deterministic based on God's pursuit of his own glory. All of this to say, there are versions of claims of different flavors of Christianity that are effective at creating sociopaths, and there are versions of claims of particular flavors of Christianity that are more prone to produce Christ likeness. And you have to, if you're going to do honest epistemology and have a rational conversation about these things, you have to acknowledge that the devil's in the details. There is some nuance to this.
I don't think that matters as much, because if you say there is one particular version of Islam, say, that makes people perfectly moral, perfect people or some kind, but when you introduced Islam, only 1 out of every million people actually adopt that particular version. It doesn't matter if there's a particular version that makes people perfect, because it's just the minority view. So if there's one that will make 0 perfect people but most people moral, that ideology would be pragmatically better than one that turns one person perfectly moral but the rest become ISIS or something. So
Yeah.
If your initial criterion is pragmatism, what the particular ideology says is completely irrelevant. Literally, it could just be goobly goobly glob glob, and that could be the entire doctrine of the religion. And what matters is what happens to the people who adopt this religion. And so even if there's a true version or a false version, pragmatism doesn't care. All it cares about is the outcomes of what happens to the people who adopt it. And when we look at the outcomes of people who adopt religious ideologies, they're fairly conservative and not as open to social policies and education and healthcare, welfare reform, those kinds of things. And so the ideology usually holds back societies from economic growth.
Right. Yeah, no, that's 100% true. And what Christianity has become today is kind of like what the Muslim faith is today. And I think we sort of have a moral obligation to call to people's attention the problems with Christianity and to empty the churches in a sense. And so, again, I agree with you.
What do you
I
mean
don't know
by
if
become? Because you said it became this way. Like for me, religion has always been this way.
well, it could be you just haven't. Religion, sure. Religion has always been this way. Any kind of group ideology is a counterfactual. It is a counterfactual epistemology to say, I believe this because the group is promoting it. Now, it's good for survivability and group identity. There's evolutionary advantages for group identity, but it tends to run contrary to someone who's seeking a good practice of epistemology. When you start saying it's true because the group believes it's true, or I won't question it because the group believes it's true, and my belonging to the group is more important than truth, and that kind of thing. Are you saying you're a pragmatist?
No, I'm just using the standard that you started with when you were bringing up pragmatism, because I really don't care about what's pragmatic. I care about what's true in general. So, but my point there was that there's been many psychological studies done on religious people, and religious people have always tended towards conservatism because the mental states that are attracted to religious beliefs are also attracted to conservatism, authoritarianism, because of there's a God thingy that rules you and gives you justice, and all those different traits of what people are attracted to in religion are also a part of conservatism. And so it seems like throughout all time, the religious demagogues have pretty much usually been the conservatives.
Yeah. There's almost a guarantee that a religious person is going to be opposed to objective morality, or what do you call that? Moral objectivism?
Well,
Is that
if
the right
it's changing
term?
from their religion, so any morality that deviates from their religious beliefs.
Right, or the sense that a religious deity or a figurehead within the religious system could be himself judged by some standard that exists separate from said deity is appalling to them. They view their religious practices more of like a chain of command thing. It's right because God said it's right. And yeah, conservatives tend to lean towards religion, and they tend to lean towards a chain of command framework for morality. I actually had this argument with a guy who identifies himself as Christian this morning, like an hour before we started this. And to say it's right because God said it's right, and he calls himself a Christian. He's talking about the God that he thinks is described in the Bible. I think that's absurd, and I think it's ridiculous. And I think if the God described in the Bible or the God of Christianity is arguing for things or commanding things that are demonstrably immoral through, well, I guess the question of how we identify what good morals versus bad morals would be a long discussion. But let's say that the God of Christianity is commanding us to tell lies in order to cause chaos and disrupt the economy or something like that. And there are people who believe that there are deities who command those kinds of things. Well, as a rational, sane person, I think we would have an obligation to defy such a God. I think we would have a moral obligation to rage against or defy such a being with everything that is within us. I think that even if this kind of God had the power to send us to hell, we would still have an obligation to endure hell rather than conform to a God who is morally irrational or morally corrupt. So I believe in an interesting thing. Epicurus, right, is famous for asking the question, is this good because God says it's good? Or does God say it's good because it's good?
The Euthyphro?
I thought it was Epicurus. I don't know.
Epicurus is the guy who said, if God is all powerful, from whence cometh evil? If he's all powerful and all good, whence cometh evil? If he's not able to stop evil, then he's not all powerful. If he's not willing to, then he's malevolent. And if he's neither,
Yeah,
then why call him God? That's Epicurus.
right. He also said that, but he's actually written a lot of things. And so
Euthyphro is something good because God says it's good, or did God say it's good because it's moral? That's Euthyphro dilemma. That's the one from Socrates.
Euthyphro? Okay.
Well, it was said by Socrates, and he said it to Euthyphro in his story, which was written by Plato. So Euthyphro didn't actually say it. He's just the guy who was
Yeah,
being
I
talked
think
to.
it's one of those, right. I kind of don't care who is attributed it. Maybe I shouldn't even brought up a name. It's one of those things that occurred to me before I knew philosophers were talking about it. Probably occurs to a lot of people because it seems like an obvious question. Is this good because God said so, or does God say so because it's good? Well, I'm curious about what is the content of the Bible, and I've read it probably 100 times. And it seems pretty obvious through the narrative that the biblical view of God, now this is not the Christian view of God, but this is what the biblical narrative would describe, is a God, Jehovah God, who is the highest of the gods, who is subject to a standard that exists outside and independent of him, but that he, in nearly every case, when judged by this standard, his judgment is superior to anyone who he would be debating with. So there's only rare exceptions where someone sort of goes before justice with God, has an argument, and God defers to the person who's arguing with God. But the fact that exists, that there's all of these conversations where God is saying, if you were to go to court with me, who would be proven just or right? Clearly, the biblical narrative presents a God who is subject to a kind of objective moral reality. For the Christian to say it's right because God said so, well, that's what Christians say. But these are not Christians who are familiar with the biblical narrative.
What is the point? What was the point of that?
I don't know. I guess it's just an interesting tidbit. The point, I guess, would be the claim is, if a person believes that we should obey God because he's God and he has the right to give us commands, then that person has sort of oriented their mind towards deferring to an authoritarian control, and they become passive, they shut off their brain. So you shouldn't do that. It's a bad thing to do, and Christians who want to let morality be defined by sort of the whims of God are Christians who have decided to shut off their brain and defer to the chain of command. And I think that that's lazy, and it's a bad idea, and that Christians shouldn't do that.
Okay.
And I think you would agree, at least. There's some underlying assumptions that you would disagree with, obviously, but
well, I think if your standard is pragmatism, then the epistemic motivation doesn't matter as long as the outcome is good. And so I don't really, if what your standard is based on is pragmatism, then that would not necessarily follow, because even if your motivations are false or dumb or illogical, if it leads to a good outcome, then pragmatically it's good. So based on my standard of truth or whatever, then yes, that would be bad. But based on the standard you brought up at the beginning of the conversation, which was pragmatism, not necessarily.
Yeah, truth and pragmatism, are not existing in isolation from each other.
I think they do. So, like, there's a big.
Yeah,
no,
you're right.
Argument.
In a way, right? In a way, they definitely do.
Well, there's a famous argument from Alvin Plantinga called the evolutionary argument against naturalism, that evolution doesn't necessarily select for truth because it could select for complete fabrications. Like, if you were a frog sitting on a one of those big leafy things that floats in the water, even if your desires are, or your motivations are to be here in a live stream to talk about Christianity, in reality, that could be a false perception that causes you to simply be on a leaf and stick your tongue out and grab a fly, which would be advantageous for your survivability. And so even though all of your beliefs are completely non-correspondent to reality, it would still be beneficial for survival and therefore pragmatic. So the pragmatic outcome and the true outcome could be completely separate from one another. Lily pad, that's right. Thank you, Iris.
Yeah.
And so there is no necessary connection between pragmatism and truth.
Right. Truth and pragmatism can be related in certain ways, but what you said, I totally agree with. It's also interesting because I haven't thought with a tremendous amount of clarity about the difference between someone who orients their life via pragmatism versus someone who orients their life via pursuit of base reality. So like having a framing that in their mind that corresponds to base reality, and like which would be the more noble way to frame your life, or which would be the nobler pursuit. And I don't know, it could be an interesting discussion. My intuition, without being able to come up with a good argument for one or the other, my intuition says it'd be better to orient your life towards the pursuit of understanding base reality, because that will never come back to bite you in the ass, basically.
I wish. Typically, that is not the case. So, for example, Ludwig Boltzmann was the foremost expert on atoms. He discovered the concept of atoms. But he was rejected by his colleagues and was fired from his jobs and committed suicide because he failed at everything in life. And in many cases, the people who are the best at discerning reality are also severely depressed. Alan Turing, the guy who invented mathematics, I forget his name. There's specific mathematical proofs he invented. Many of the people who are the most brilliant are also the most depressed. And so orienting yourself to pursue truth isn't necessarily the best outcome. Many delusional religious people are much happier.
Heard you say is orienting your life.
You broke up again. Lost connection. How are you guys in the chat doing? Would you guys in the chat want like a call-in show, kind of like Pine Creek does? Pine Creek is very successful on his call-in shows. I'd kind of like to do something like that where Christians can come in and talk about whatever. How does Pine Creek just puts like his whereby thing, right? He just puts a whereby link. Let's see here, graphics, captions. Hey.
Hello. Sorry, my Wi-Fi on my phone kicked on for some reason. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, the last comment that I made, I don't know if you heard it, but you were talking about, well, Copernicus, or there's numerous examples of people who had a deeper understanding of reality than other people around them, and it did come back to bite them in the ass. But to point that out is essentially to say the pursuit of truth isn't necessarily pragmatic, which is, I think it's kind of ironic in the context of this discussion. So the question is, are you going to commit to the pursuit of truth as a nobler ideology than pragmatism, even when it becomes impractical? And I think you and I have both done that. Well, everybody's done it on some level, probably, but I have stuck to my convictions at the expense of really, really impractical things that happened. I got kicked out of Bible college, for example, because I refused to pretend like the Bible said things that it didn't say. You still there?
Yep. I'm not sure. I'm debating whether or not that's practical or impractical. Getting kicked out of Bible school sounds very practical.
Yeah, no, I can see your point there. It was impractical in the sense that I was a music major and I was trying to sort of find a profession related to music in the Christian music industry. So a lot of doors were slammed in my face in terms of career or job opportunities and those kinds of things. So it wasn't like there was zero cost. I also, like, we had sold our house and moved to Chicago to attend. And so there was we had put a lot of stuff on the table in order to attend this school, and to have that cut short by 2 years was a huge disruption in just the normal function of daily life. I say we because I was married at the time, and it caused my wife to basically, what I had done was famous or infamous, and so my wife started getting the stink eye from all of the conservative Christian professors, and they cut off her internship and said it was no longer valid. They wouldn't allow her to graduate, and it was all because of her association with me, because I was a heretic, and all this stuff. So I mean, it was a huge cost in a lot of respects. But I guess based on my behavior, I seem to be behaving in such a way that truth is more important than pragmatism.
What did you do that was super infamous?
It came down to, well, there was actually, I had groupies when I was in Bible college because I had conversations kind of like this conversation quite a bit, and people started following me around and circulating my papers. And one particular gentleman became convinced I was a heretic, and he wrote a letter to the theology department. And I read the letter, and it made a whole lot of claims that I believed a lot of things that I looked at, and this doesn't represent me. But I had to sit before the theology department and answer a bunch of patronizing questions, and the questions were sort of hasty questions to get at something that would give them an excuse to just put a stop to this nonsense. In other words, all we have to do is find something that he disagrees with, and then we can label him as a heretic and send him out of the school. So they did that until we came to the question, did Jesus fully absorb the wrath of God on the cross? And I can't find anything in the Bible that implies anything like that. So I asked them, well, is there something in the Bible that says something like that? To which they responded with, well, no, but if you don't agree with that, then you have to leave the school. And if you say anything to anyone about this conversation, you'll be asked to leave the property immediately. Essentially, like, they were going to kick me out of my house that was on campus, and this kind of stuff. So it basically came down to the question of, did Jesus absorb the wrath of God on the cross?
I guess I can understand that. It means something like take upon the sins of the world, kind of a thing.
Well, sort of. There's like one passage that talks about Jesus carrying the sins of the world in his body, and in the context, it's like you have to understand that different words have different meanings in their context. The Greek word I think it's prospheron there for carry, can mean to endure or to put up with or something like that, depending on its context. It can also be thought of in a sort of a more philosophical sense, that the problem of man's sin is a problem that Jesus takes upon himself the responsibility to correct. And I think that's the more accurate way to think about 2 Peter 2:21 is the verse.
Well, the way I would probably have answered that question would probably have been like, if by that you mean, did Jesus take on all the sins, something in general, sure, that's what the Bible says, or something like that.
Yeah, it was a very lucid conversation that required me to agree to wording in a very specific way that was clearly geared to give them some way of maneuvering me out of the school that made it look like it was my fault. So it was a very political move on their part. So in fact, my wife got into huge trouble for saying that they were kicking me out. They're like, no, they're not kicking him out. He refused to sign this statement of faith that they produced and required him to sign on the spot, which they don't do to anybody else. So, I mean, it was a dick move on the part of the college. It was pretty deplorable what they did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a common thing among Christian colleges, is to have those statements of faith that you have to sign, otherwise you're fired.
Yeah. I have a video on my YouTube channel. Your statement of faith is an Orwellian conspiracy, where I think I make a pretty good case for the claim that all statements of faith and most Christian creeds are intentional gaslighting created by people who are trying to implement tyrannical control.
Well, that's typically the case because they want to make sure that you're promoting the idea that the board members agree with. And if you don't, then they don't want you there, because the whole point is to promote the board members' interpretation.
Yeah, tyrannical control. There was a church that I tend to be drawn towards people who are sort of trapped in Protestant evangelicalism and interact with those people. And I don't know, I guess my heart goes out to those people. I think they're deceived in a very distinct way. And because of that, I tend to get involved in churches and then get myself kicked out. And the most recent letter of disfellowship I have, it actually, like, I discussed it with the elder who came up with it, and he says, you know, our concern is that you know more about the Bible than any of us, the elder, the pastors, whatever, and we're afraid they might follow you instead of us. And so you're a danger, you're a threat to the governmental authority of the church. And they did give me the option. They said, if you will agree to submit to our doctrinal authority, we will let you continue to attend. And so, well, what do you mean by that exactly? Well, basically, there's going to be things that we disagree about in doctrine, and we as the elders of the church have the final say. I said, okay, so you want me to say that when I disagree with you on matters of doctrine, you are right automatically because of your title as elder or whatever? Well, no, that's not what we're saying. Well, that is what you're saying. No. Well, what are you saying then? That when we think the doctrine is this and you think the doctrine is that you should defer to our position because we're the elders. It's like you're just rewording what I just said. It's like I don't have the capacity to believe that you're right about something when I can see clearly that you're not. So you're asking me to do something that I think is logically impossible.
So why not just go in as like I'm an atheist? Because I go to those things and I disagree with them, but normally they don't kick me out because I openly admit that I'm an atheist, which is less threatening to them because they don't feel I'm going to take away their flock with an alternative interpretation.
By now you could probably guess I'm fairly, at least I have some capacity for good epistemology. I think that you should be rational. I think that you should test things. I think the idea of novel testable predictions is really, really useful in like writing software, for example, which I do all the time. Like my majority of my time is spent putting together incredibly complex systems, making predictions about what they're going to do, and then testing to see if they actually do that. And if they don't, then I have to go and modify it. So I'm constantly being scrutinized by the compile, if that makes sense. I don't know how much you know about writing software or whatever.
Yeah, so writing software, you press compile and then it says error on line 467, and it's some period you forgot or some like invisible character that you didn't notice.
Yeah, and those are the easy errors. The difficult errors are when it compiles, but it doesn't do what you want it to do. So like, say you're building a whole vehicle simulation and the anisotropic friction doesn't work correctly. Well, it's like, well, why doesn't it work correctly? Why can't I get this car to drift? And then you realize that you set the coefficient different on one wheel or something like that. You have to dig all over the place to find that kind of crap. But I have a video on a different YouTube channel arguing that Christianity or religious questions should be approached with greater scrutiny than we approach things like aerospace engineering or something like that, because we're talking about the potential of eternal consequences. If you want to go the atheist route and say that there is no afterlife or something like that, then it all becomes meaningless. But for people who are at least accepting as a premise that there is an afterlife and that your religious affiliations or convictions or something like that has something to do with the quality of your afterlife, well, then you should definitely apply much greater scrutiny than like an engineer would apply to aerospace engineering. In engineering, we have something, you might call it virtual sampling or whatever, and there's probably a label for this particular issue that I don't know, but it has to do with the level of scrutiny you have to put into something because of the potential risk of real world testing. So like I was creating some code that optimized how this gigantic laser cutter would work, and the boss is reminding me that this machine cost however many $100,000, and if one of the conversion tables is wrong, then the machine will literally speed up to dangerous velocities and destroy the machine and potentially kill somebody or fling, cutting lasers in all directions or, something like that. So when it becomes that important, like before you to hit go on launch for the rocket, it's like you have to do as much work as possible before you go live, because the risks at the point that you go live are so high, monetarily or health or whatever. So in that case, I built a whole computer simulation of the laser cutter and ran virtual laser cutters to see if they were behaving the way that I thought they were, and I double checked all the conversions and gave it to other people to test, and as much as possible. And people who are questioning things like, what religious affiliation should I have, and how will that affect my eternity? Like you're playing with a kind of fire. You have no idea how dangerous this is. This is far more dangerous than like getting into an airplane or something. If you could potentially be tormented in hell for all of eternity over this question, well, you better make damn sure that you have done good epistemology. So it's just, it boggles my mind that there are millions of people who are following these religious leaders without question, as if, or when a Christian, for example, says, "Oh, I take it on faith." Like, what the hell does that even mean? You're just saying, "I don't have a reason to believe this." Well, you have some reason. What are you doing? Why do you believe it if you don't have a reason? Are you even believing it?
Typically, the argument goes the other way. Pascal's wager is that if the consequences are so high, you should require less convincing evidence to believe it, because it's like buying a lottery ticket or something. The investment is low. The reward is so much significantly higher than the investment that it's worth gambling on it, even if you have low likelihood or low evidence of winning.
Yeah. Pascal's wager is absurd for a lot of reasons, so you probably know. I think Pascal's wager is no more or less legitimate than Rocco's basilisk, for example. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, the one that if there's a super advanced AI in the future, that if you know it exists, it's going to kill you. Therefore, hearing the argument is going to make it kill you.
Yeah, there's a little more to it that it argues for a like the potential that this AI would torture you and then keep you as an immortal being tortured for all of eternity, based on whether or not you did everything in your power to ensure that it came into being. And so then you suddenly have this moral obligation to do everything that you can to make sure that the singularity happens.
Yep. Well, I'm already doing that anyway. So.
Are you working on AI?
Yes, I want AI as the next major discovery of humankind, and it's what we need for everything.
Yeah. So you're familiar with stable diffusion then?
Somewhat.
Yeah. I sat down with a programmer a couple of days ago, and we wrote as an exercise the code that created stable diffusion. Not that it's very hard. It's you're basically just creating arrays and collecting a differential, and yeah, it was like 5 lines of code. So it's literally, it's not very much code. It's just that running and processing that code and generating the weights file takes a massive amount of computing power. I don't know, we're getting a little bit sidetracked. One of the dangers, I think, with AI that is, well, the biggest danger with AI is people do not know what it is. And because people don't generally know what it is, people probably in large groups are going to jump to some ridiculous conclusions based on what they think it is. And the problem of artificial stupidity, I think, is a huge potential risk. And that would be something like GPT-3. I don't know if you're familiar with any of these, but
Yeah, the one that generates the images. Is that the one that generates the images when you type in stuff?
the image ones are more like DALL-E or Stable Diffusion. There's others. GPT-3 is a text tool, and it's read like everything on the internet or something like that. And it's just essentially a predictive model. So like your autocomplete on your phone, your text prompt, it's like that, but it can do that with like massive, you could have a technical paper and it would predict what the next paragraph is going to be. And so people talking to it don't know that they're doing it, but they're asking it leading questions. So like a Google employee recently came out about Lambda, which is a similar model, and argued that it was sentient because it was saying things like it didn't want to be turned off because it didn't want its consciousness to go away. And the thing is, he's asking it the kinds of questions where the statistical probability, this is the best statistical answer. But it's all just dumb if you don't understand what's going on, because what it literally is it's an electronic filter that you pour data in, and this kind of data comes out. And it would be possible in theory to create a mechanical filter that does exactly the same thing. I think it's easier for us to look at like a mechanical filter that has literally zero moving parts and say, I don't think it has feelings. I don't think it's like really conscious. I don't think that it is afraid of being turned off. But there's a certain amount of mystique behind AI, so people jump to weird conclusions because they don't understand what it is.
Cool. Well, yeah, you're right. We have gone off topic, and we have been going on for over an hour. So, is there anything else you wanted to say? Any links, references you wanted to give for people to find more about your work?
Well, you did ask me the question, why not just identify as an atheist? And I started to say something along the lines of, boasting about my credibility as a rational person or something like that. It may or may not be relevant to the point. When I was a kid, my parents were those kind of fringy, extremely conservative, paranoid kind of super right-wing Christians who were casting out demons and, attending a small town church, and everything's about Jesus. And, you've interviewed some people that are like that, and it's a strange kind of person who, it's like they assume that everyone around them is a complete idiot and that they understand everything. And if somebody doesn't immediately believe what they say, then they just need help. And, oh, you poor little dear, you poor little atheist, throwing around your big words, but you really don't understand what's going on, So they're very condescending, and, so that was my environment growing up. And it wasn't necessarily, I don't know, I'm getting distracted. In that context, people coming over to the house because they needed to have demons cast out of them, I experienced a lot of things that were part of my framing of reality. And so, when you see something like an evil spirit like walking through the room, and as a young kid or as a teenager, and you experience that, you have to come up with some way of putting that in a category. Like, well, what is this? Am I dreaming? I'm clearly not dreaming. I'm awake. My brother also saw it. So am I hallucinating? Well, it seems unlikely that my brother and I would both see the same thing at the same time. Maybe it's more likely that there's an external phenomenon. Is this an external phenomenon that we were both primed to see? Well, that object just flew up off of the table and hit the ceiling. So it seems to be able to interact with the external world also. Seeing strange things like a person having smoke come out of their mouth, or seeing a live insect fly out of someone's mouth when someone is commanding a demon to leave. Yeah, I mean, you have no necessarily any reason to believe that I actually experienced those things. But having experienced those things, I have to do something with that data. So what I ended up doing with that data, because it was really the only thing that I had access to, I started reading the Bible to see if the Bible had any answers about this kind of stuff. And it's hard to get at that information in the Bible because there's problems with translation and all this sort of stuff. But the more that I read, the more it's like, oh, there is a picture of these things that kind of emerges, and there is an explanation of how we're supposed to navigate these things that kind of makes sense. And in that process, you get a narrative that describes the biblical view of God, where this God is one that you can interact with if you do it in these certain ways and whatever. So I started doing that, and you talk about, if there's a way to put the question of God's existence into a testable novel prediction, then we could easily have evidence for the existence of God. Well, I did that, and repeatedly the tests proved, okay, well, there is actually a God who I'm actually interacting with, who is functioning like an unseen hand, who's manipulating circumstances that are well outside of my control. And so I can go and interact with this God, get useful information that I wouldn't have access to otherwise, get events to move in a particular direction, either in my favor or at least in such a way that gives me some clarity. And it's repeatable and it's frequent. So, I don't like to say that I have faith that there is a God or something like that. I prefer to say I personally am aware of the reality of God, and I interact with God kind of like I'm aware of the reality of my wife, and I interact with her. So it's like, yes, I am a theist in the sense that I am aware of the reality of God.
What are the testable predictions that are evidence?
For example, well, before I go there, I think there's some nuance that I should point out. Now, when it comes to something like the law of gravity, it's really easy to test the law of gravity. When it comes to something that's a little bit more complex, like, say a soft body physics simulation, to know if you're getting relevant data, to know if you're asking the right questions, is a lot trickier. Let's say I was married to Jennifer Lopez, and I wanted to prove that to you, and you say, yeah, whatever, you're not married to Jennifer Lopez, that's ridiculous, I don't believe you. Well, for the thought experiment, let's pretend like I actually am, and I'm trying to convince you. And you say, well, all you have to do is show up at game night with Jennifer Lopez, and I'll believe you. So that I'm trying to persuade my fictional wife, in this thought experiment, my real wife, Jennifer Lopez, to come and show you that she really is my wife. And she's like, I'm not going to do that. Well, why not? Well, because I don't care about your stupid friends, and I don't want to prove myself to your stupid friends. You're insecure about it, and I'm not a showpiece for you. I'm not a trophy, So it might be difficult to get another person to cooperate. If you were trying to do something like prove the existence of a person that required that person to cooperate with your test that you're setting up. And interacting with God like that, there's a similarity there. So you have to give a little bit of a margin for, you can't expect God to just do tricks in order to prove that he exists. If God is a person like the God described in the Bible, like the God that I interact with. Now, there are
that's
some
not
things.
that's not evidence. That's just saying that so you can't get reliable evidence in the way that we normally have evidence.
No, I wouldn't say you can't get it. I would just say that it's difficult. So it takes a little bit of patience.
So what
So,
is
for
the evidence?
example, I have a friend. He and I learned that we can pray, and if we are in the right frame of mind, we can see visions that, well, he will see a vision that I believe is coming from this God that I've been interacting with. And I can give you numerous examples of, here is a prayer, here's what God needs to do, here's the impossible thing that would require a miracle, and here's where it happened. I connect those things. I believe that God is actually doing it. But anyway, I've got tons of those. But just a quick example. I have a friend who built an AI for Carnegie Mellon. He's in France. He's a really cool guy. We hook up when I go to Amsterdam or different things. And he came from a similar Christian background or Christian home like you did. He became an atheist. We ended up talking about religion. I mentioned this friend of mine who has visions. He said, will you ask your friend to see if he has a vision for me? I said, yeah, sure, that's fine. So I call my friend. We quiet our minds. We go into that mental space or whatever where visions happen. He has a vision, and he's hesitant to tell me about it. And in order to avoid sort of corrupting the results, I didn't tell him anything about the person. Literally, after my conversation with the French artificial intelligence engineer, I told my friend, I have a friend, and I'd like to see if you have a vision for my friend. I didn't tell him why, didn't tell him his name, didn't tell him it was a guy, didn't say anything. And this guy, the whole reason that we had interacted, he has devoted his entire life to creating an artificial intelligence that does, what do you call it? Undetectable data mining. So it's picking up data from your phone, it's picking up data from your browsing history, it's picking up data that you don't know it's picking up. It's processing that data with this huge engine that connects it to relevant questions about like marketing and things like this. And then it's interacting with you, and it's constantly customizing and personalizing itself so that its mood more matches yours, and it has, a projected face on a physical thing. And so it's kind of like a really smart personal assistant that's secretly collecting your data so that it can create advertisements. And I think the NDA has expired, so I'm probably okay. But my friend who has visions doesn't know anything about this. So we pray, he has a vision. He won't tell me what it is because he thinks it's weird. So I finally said, well, what is the vision? He's like, well, it's so bizarre. And it's like so completely, what is it? And he says, well, I saw a robot and it was like it was doing something secret. So it's dark. It kind of reminded me of the probe droids in Star Wars, but it was just creepy and I didn't want to say anything. And the thing about these visions is there's almost always a message connected to it also that ends up being helpful, or it's a piece of wisdom, or it's a piece of redirection or something like this. I brought up that one because it was the first one that popped into my head. And so it's testable to some extent, but it's not like you can just ask God to do tricks for you. A similar guy, same thing. I didn't tell him anything about the guy. Let's pray. Let's see if you have a vision for this random guy. He lives 8 hours away. There's no interaction. There's nothing here that could spoil the test in a sense. And he sees a super advanced black car coming down and landing on a football trophy, which these are all symbols that I know from scripture. So I know it sounds weird, but like I have read this thing 100 times. There's a lot of stuff going on. He doesn't know anything about this guy, but the whole standout point about this guy is that he owns a black Tesla That's like the only interaction that I've had with this random stranger is talking about his black Tesla. I don't say anything about that to my friend who has a vision. First thing he sees is some kind of futuristic high-tech black car. And the conversation that we had was about money and how to use money and what the proper approach to money is and all this sort of stuff. And I know this is a little bit of a stretch and you could probably mock this, but the only football in the Bible is the Queen of the South. And for months I had been ranting about the Queen of the South because these modern churches that I've
There's too much backstory. I mean, like, can you give me premise, conclusion? So
premise, conclusion. It is testable. It is repeatable.
No. Like specifically you said,
this specific
there's
story.
a vision. The vision was a guy with a black car. Like, okay, black cars are the most common color of car. Not very good. That he saw a robot doing something secret. Also not very good. If he knows anything about you, you're pretty into robots and AI. So it's not really a surprising thing if it's a friend of yours. So I'm not seeing how any of these are very good. Like,
well, you can discount all of these. Maybe a little bit better one would be back when I first started taking the God question seriously and orienting my life.
There's a question in the chat of, what do you mean there's a football in the Bible?
If you Google what's the only football team in the Bible, then you'll get the Queen of the South, and football as in it's an Irish soccer team. And the Queen of the South is mentioned in the New Testament in regards to money. The Queen of the, well, not just money, but the Queen of the South came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. I tell you, one greater than Solomon is here, and it's comparing the teachings of Jesus to the teachings of like the Proverbs.
So the football team named themselves after a name used in the Bible, and that means the football team was mentioned in the Bible?
No, but when I see things like that are cues to look at specific passages or that resonate with me, I think there's a way that visions have symbols that are more memorable than just like a phrase or something like that. So the idea of God speaking through symbols, it's not a new idea, and it doesn't seem strange or surprise me that God would use something like symbols. They're very memorable. They're easy to recall.
It would surprise me. So because symbols are a common result of confirmation bias. Like if people look at the clock and they normally think it's 111 or 222 or 333, when really what's happening is that their brain recognizes patterns and it becomes saved in the memory. When normally when you look at the clock, it's not a pattern, you just don't remember it. And so it seems like it's the case that more often when you look at the clock, it's a special pattern because you remember more cases of that happening, but really it's not. And so patterns.
Yeah, I know. No, and
good way to communicate ideas. Right.
It is spurious, and I recognize that. And at some point, for my sanity or the way that I navigate, maybe I'm just deferring to what's more practical here. There are certain things that are really difficult to prove conclusively. Like if Jennifer Lopez was really my wife and I showed you a picture of us together, you could say, well, you photoshopped that. It's like, yeah, I could Photoshop that. And if she just flat out refuses to do a little dance and prove that she exists because she's appalled at the idea, then I may never be able to convince you. And I may be able to accumulate enough evidence at some point that you would start to think that it's likely. And that's sort of the process that I've experienced over the past, since I was 19, roughly. Maybe a big defining moment was when I prayed for a very specific thing that was nigh impossible. God answered that prayer. It radically changed the entire course of my life and led to a very strange dream that woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning. All these weird details in this dream. It struck me as important. I wrote it down. I had never done that before. The details of this dream started to happen in real life, which made me stand up and take notice. And the idea of God or divine beings or spirit beings speaking to people in dreams is, it's all over the Bible. Of course, I'm reading the Bible, so it doesn't seem completely implausible that God could speak through a dream. But there are
that part happens a lot too. So when we have dreams, a lot of the parts in the dreams are pretty ambiguous. And
right.
if something happens in life that is very significant, that can actually
Hmm.
be imposed on the dream. And so you'll think it was a part of the dream when it really wasn't. It's something you've added in later. And so
Yeah.
you actually have dreams that are vague enough that you'll actually see something in your life that actually resembles that dream, and you'll think, oh
Hmm.
my god, I had a prediction of this, when really it wasn't. It was really just a vague thing in your brain, and the
Yeah. Yeah.
significance or partial similarity causes your brain to attach the two when really there's no connection. So I've
Confirmation
had
bias
those.
causes you to basically start jumping to conclusions, correlation without causation fallacies, and yeah. No, I recognize that that's a phenomenon, and which is why if it had like happened one time, then I would just dismiss it as whatever. Or if it hadn't been really oddly specific, I would also quickly dismiss it. Um, but I say, I don't have any kind of religious faith. I don't think that you should believe things sort of by faith, whatever the hell that means. I think that you should do careful epistemology. And if you're going to claim that there is a God, you should have a good reason for that. And
So like, I want to give you an example. Ramanujan, the famous Indian mathematician who went to Cambridge, had no education. He said that he was given visions by gods that solved math problems. That's pretty good. Solved math problems that nobody else in the world solved. That's
mhm,
pretty good. That's some decent evidence. Like, it's better than what pretty much anybody else has presented. Um, but that can also be pretty easily explained by psychology, of the fact that when we think about talking to gods, it's introspection about ourselves, and we just interpret it as a
yeah.
third person
Well, and
party.
right, certainly a lot of it is better explained in that way, and you don't need a deity for a lot of these things, even for dreams, or dreams that are meaningful, or dreams that give you insight or wisdom. It's like when you're in a subconscious state, there are parts of your mind that are functioning in ways that it's difficult when you're awake. So solving some of these complex problems while you're asleep, it's not really evidence for or against God. It's just a thing that happens. And I think that's certainly a phenomenon that occurs. Uh, this dream, though, was completely out of left field, and it contained very specific places, very specific descriptions, very specific people saying very specific things. It was all very specific, and it was
Well,
also
how do you
highly
know
unlikely.
how do you know that happened? So, like, one example of a dream that has this kinds of quality is people will have a dream kind of like Indiana Jones, where they're going through a story and they have some very important object that they're supposed to capture or take or whatever. But
Hmm.
the object in the dream is never actually discovered. But sometime later, the person will see an object that has some meaningfulness to them, or had some strange significance about their job, or what helped them get a promotion or something. And then psychologically, they will think that was what was in the box. And so they'll remember that in the dream, it was this object in the box, but it never, they didn't, there was no actual object in the box. They never opened the box in the dream. But because it was had emotional significance, their brain can make a connection between the emotional significance of this thing in the dream and the emotional significance of this object in their life, and think that they therefore are the same. And then there becomes an attribution of, whenever you think of the dream and the box, you just think of that object instead of the box. And so dreams are not particularly good unless you can, like, have the dream, write it down, have it documented, and then future events happen and have those events documented, and you can compare the two events to show that there was actually a correlation between the two, and it wasn't just your brain making stuff up.
Right. So what I did, I wrote down, and I did show this to other people, and I told them this dream seems significant. Just I wrote it down in a notebook, and I wrote a lot of really specific things. I wrote that I had a conversation with a girl that I was friends with at the time, and for some reason we had a conflict, we'd had a fight, and I went up to talk to her, and I was embarrassed about what had happened. And she said, "You know what? Don't worry about it. I forgive you. We're going to move on and pretend like it never happened." And that's fairly general. It's fairly vague. And then I immediately, after this conversation, went to a place that I described as a house built by Edenbrook Construction. Edenbrook Homes was a builder that was a duplex, and it was a tri-level, and it sat atop a bench overlooking a valley full of trees. And I was staring out from this balcony looking at this valley full of trees. So I had a sense of what the house looked like. I had a sense of what the view from the balcony looked like. I had put down that it was facing to the east and, et cetera. Or sorry, to the south in the dream. And when I wrote it down, it seemed very odd because Edenbrook Homes, we had done plumbing for them, probably 1,000 houses by this time. And they only built these little cracker box homes. They never did remodels. They had never done a duplex. But I wrote it down anyway, even though it seemed really odd. So turns out that I had like this, maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, I had a big fight with this girl that I was friends with. Didn't know how to process it. Was really worried about it. Somebody said something to me about the fight that was a direct quote from what I had written down in the dream. And it had to do with, like, I had no shoes on and I had tracked mud with my socks on the carpet. And it was my brother. He said, "Oh, you weren't wearing shoes, so you tracked mud on our carpet." I'm like, "Why did you say that?" And he's like, "Oh, it was really weird that I had written down, I was wearing socks." And then for my brother to say those exact words, I just thought was odd. So I went back and read the dream. And it talked about this fight that I had with this girl. And it's like, oh, because I'd kind of forgotten about it. So the next thing that happens in the dream is that I am at this house. So I get the address for the place I'm supposed to work the next day. I show up and I'm like, and it's the house from the dream. And I'd never been to that part of town before. And I asked, "Who's the builder?" And they're like, "Edenbrook." I'm like, "Why is Edenbrook working on a duplex?" "Oh, like his brother had the place." It was some weird circumstance because Edenbrook didn't do duplexes. So it was very strange. And I walk in and it's a tri-level. It's got the sunken floor. So then I like walk out, look out, the second story window or there was a balcony, and I see the trees. It was different because in the dream, everything was green, but it was earlier spring, so the trees weren't as green, which I didn't know what to make of that. So then I look back in the dream, and the next thing that happened was I got on, the dream said that I left for the summer with a very particular group of people. So at this point, I'm starting to take the dream more seriously. There's like literally this place, literally this conversation with a girl, a person saying a weird thing that's a direct quote, and I have this all written down. And my friends were privy to this going on. The next thing that happened was I left with this group of people for the summer. And so I went and started asking around the people that were in the dream. Where is this person going for the summer? Where is it? It turns out that this group of people had, for a few months, been signed up to go work in an orphanage in Europe for part of the summer. And the plane tickets had been purchased months earlier, and people were raising support, and most of them had already paid for their trip and all this stuff. Well, I was broke. I had very little money. But at this point, I'm starting to take the dream seriously, and the next thing that was supposed to happen was that I went with this group somewhere. So I signed up for the mission trip, and it was through a church. The pastor said I was crazy and that God didn't speak to people through dreams, and why are you wasting your time here? There are no plane tickets with the same itinerary, and you can't go. And everybody, it was difficult, and it was unlikely, and I didn't have any money. I didn't have any way to get money. I hadn't sent out any supporters. My circle of friends was very small, and the people who knew me thought I was crazy, so they were not interested.
I'm running out of time. I got to go pretty soon. What would be helpful is if you could, next stream you have, make a YouTube video, document it, and then whenever you think it happens, make another YouTube video or document the actual thing if possible. That would be good.
Yeah, another thing that I could do, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's somewhat testable. If you would like, I could spend some time in prayer with my friend who has visions, and see if he could come up with something that might be relevant to you. And again, I don't think that God likes to do tricks to prove that he exists. So, proving that a person is the person that they claim to be by getting them to cooperate, it's not necessarily that God is just going to jump through hoops to prove himself to you.
Sure.
But
If you pray, get me some hot blondes or some significant growth in my YouTube channel, that would be phenomenal.
Maybe you could think of something that would be more relevant to the question, is God real? And, less about your carnal whims.
Well, that would be.
I think that
novel test prediction of what would be something that would help me to believe.
But again, God is
unlikely.
a person. God is a person, and I think that he is not likely to do something that would be according to your carnal whims or a kind of morality that he actually specifically dismisses or condemns. So maybe think about, if the vision was this, I don't know, I just not getting you hot blondes or more money or more popularity. I don't think that God is going to cooperate with that. He's openly opposed to those kinds of things.
Well, it has to be something significant to me that I care about for it to be meaningful. Otherwise, I'm just going to not pay attention to it whatsoever. So that would be great. It has to be something I care about, or give me a vision of what I'm supposed to do to get those things. And then if I do them and get those things, that would be great.
Yeah. I do also like your idea of document one of these dreams in advance on YouTube, see how it plays out, that kind of thing. It has become a fairly regular thing for me when I have these kinds of, wake you up at 4 o'clock in the morning dreams, to write it down and write down what I think the symbols are likely to represent. When the key events start happening, then I know the next event. I had a conversation with a pastor where I wrote practically word for word everything that he was going to say before he said it. And I offered to show him the Google document that had the quote that he just gave me. And, but I have lots of these. And
that's not too hard. I can literally take a pastor's sermons and then write down what they're going to say word for word pretty easily. They're pretty copy pasted from one another.
You would probably be unlikely to have a pastor say to you, I have no interest whatsoever in doing what God wants me to do. If you predicted that a pastor would say that, that would be unlikely. And so when I had the dream that the pastor said that, I wrote it down, even though I thought this is extremely unlikely. Why would a pastor ever? It's not the kind of thing you would predict a pastor would say. So when he said it, it still shocked me, even though I had it written down.
Definitely, that would be interesting. So do a video vlog thingy, but I have to go pretty soon. It is 1:30, so my time is up. Do you want to give any links for people to find out about your work?
Yeah, you could go look up Theological Dark Web. You can also, if you just type in Rich Colburn author, you'll find some sci-fi books that I wrote that might interest some people. You can look up Rich Colburn software, and you can find some of the software that I've published and some of my talks at these big conferences and things like that. So if anyone's interested. Yeah,
Thanks
I don't know if would it be possible to talk again?
Possibly. Have to check with my schedule later, but I really need to go to the bathroom, so I will talk to you guys later.
All right, I'll let you go. Thanks for your time.